Hey there, everybody. Welcome. It's Lotus, Art of Sacred Embodiment, and it's been a while since I have been here on YouTube. I'm mostly over on Patreon these days, and I think the last video I did may have been the beginning of January, and now we're at the end of January. So I wanted to talk today about all the change that's happening right now. And not so much about the change that's happening outside, even though most of us, I think, are going through some sort of deep transformation individually, in our personal lives, maybe even in our own personal identities, collectively for sure, within the structures and the systems and the climate. Both weather and just the climate of the world, and particularly here in the United States. There's a lot of unrest and upheaval, and this was all predicted, right? This was all expected, particularly by those of us in the awakening communities, the ascension communities, the spiritual evolution communities, whatever label you want to put and call what we're all doing. So it's all been anticipated. It's all been expected. But we didn't necessarily know all the ways in which it was going to play out and how it would look. And more so, what I like to talk about is the internal experience of what happens when inside of us, when things start to feel very unfamiliar and out of control. So the topic is going to be on vulnerability and what vulnerability is and different ways of looking at it. But again, most importantly, how do we hold vulnerability? So starting in January over on Patreon, we've begun working with the gene keys. And so we did the first gene key this month. And it starts out with entropy, right? So, and I'm not a gene key practitioner necessarily or an expert on it. We're just doing the very basics of it over there as we go through the 64 gene keys. But the way in which it's structured is we have the shadow frequency, we have a gift frequency that is birthed from the shadow, and then we have the siddhi, or that superpower, that higher divine frequency and quality. And so we learn how, once we can be with the shadow, right? We learn how to be with it, understand it, both in its positive and its sometimes really painful aspects, and then how to transmute it and to the next frequency that is above that. So we go from entropy to freshness, which is really about new birthing into creativity from maybe what seems like heaviness or stuckness, and then into the divine state of beauty. But what I want to talk more so today is entropy and vulnerability, and how, well, because this sort of sparked this for me. So entropy, as we were exploring it, and I'm not going to go into a lot of detail, you're more than welcome to pop over there. This first gene key is conversation, and dive into it is free over there, and then it will be on the tier 1 membership. But it's that the way to work with entropy And again, it's that sensation, it's that feeling of sort of maybe deep grief, heaviness, stuckness, that thickness. Maybe there is no motivation, there is no clarity, there is a density, there is a way in which maybe it feels a little depressed. And we've been conditioned to not settle into that state of entropy, where everything seems to kind of collapse inside. We get pulled inside. But when we're working with the gene keys, what I love, the way that Richard Rudd really holds this is that that state of entropy is really how we rebalance and prepare for the next level of creativity. And there are two different ways that we tend to deal with entropy when we don't embrace it, and that is more of that collapse into a deep, deep depression, or there's a frenetic, right? There's that like try to stay busy and try to stay happy and try to stay positive to stay away from the entropy. And the faster that we can actually surrender into that state, the faster we rebalance and reharmonize, and the quicker that we're able to gain more clarity and integration. I like the word integration from whatever has come before. And it sets us off to move into that fresh, new, revitalized state. So as we've been discussing this over on Patreon, I started really sitting with my own experience of entropy and my phases of entropy and freshness that are I'm pretty fluid in them. But one of the things that was really striking me is vulnerability. The presence of vulnerability that shows up when we start to feel unsettled, when we're in kind of unfamiliar territory, when life as we know it or the world as we know it is, whether it's our small world or the bigger world, is no longer stabilized, right? So I'm just going to read a couple things here, and then I'm going to say more about it. So I looked up the definition of vulnerability, and it says this quality or state of being exposed to the possibility of being attacked or harmed, either physically or emotionally. And then it kind of goes on to say, being open to being hurt, attacked, or harmed. It's a state of a weakness where our defenses are down, and then we're made susceptible to damage or negative influences. And that this often involves feelings of risk, uncertainty, or emotional exposure. And I like that the very tail end of that is, though it can also be a source of strength, because that's really what I want to kind of piggyback on. So there are 4 types of vulnerability. There's physical, social, economic, and environmental. And I'm going to put in here 5 emotional vulnerability. So what I guess I found most interesting is that as we're evolving, right, as we are going through our spiritual maturation process, one of the things is that we're learning how to find, excuse me, I have to plug my computer in. We're learning how to find different ways of being internally empowered. And there is that phrase, the power of vulnerability. And when we are feeling unsettled, ungrounded, when things are sort of crumbling, there is a tendency to fight against it. And I think a lot of people can relate to that frenetic aspect of entropy, where we just got to keep going. We got to try to keep busy, because if we stop, we're going to feel whatever is underneath. And there's always an element of vulnerability, of that deep tenderness, of being exposed. And we don't always know what we're exposed to, but we know it doesn't feel good, right? We know that there's fear oftentimes that resides in the vulnerability. And I'm going to say that it's the fear that keeps us from being able to slip into the tenderness of vulnerability, the tenderness of not knowing, right? Because if we think of not being protected, but if we take it further, that it's not so much, it doesn't have to be about danger, but it can be much more about, on an internal realm, it is that unknown. It's a tender place. It's sensitive, right? There's a way in which we, I think, as a species, have developed that very strong masculine part of us that wants to be armored, that wants to be strong, and doesn't really embrace fully a healthy and balanced understanding that because we're feeling tender, because we're feeling raw, maybe, because we're feeling that we don't have some sort of control, then it can be a deeper space for exploration, much deeper connectivity. And that connectivity draws us into our ability to self-source, to God source, to recognize that there are more holistic and coherent ways to be with whatever it is that we're experiencing. And I mentioned that, like, in a balanced way, because I think the other flip side of that, right? It's like the armoring and the protection and the hardness and the knowing and needing to, like, stay disconnected from the vulnerability is the masculine trying to stay disconnected from a feminine expression, right? That we deem as weakness, we deem as as wrong or bad, or we're not, we don't have it together, so to speak. But there's a beautiful feminine expression that comes through, a beautiful feminine power that comes through vulnerability. There's also a shadow aspect of it, and that is the deep collapse and victimhood that we can also suffer, right? Where we swing to the complete other side, where our excuse me, our our experience is complete disempowerment, complete helplessness and hopelessness. That we don't have the capacity, right? The ability, the fortitude, fortitude is sort of that holding. Can I hold all of this experience and stay with it until it resolves, until life moves through us in a new way? So that balanced vulnerability is a powerful place for our transformation. And it connects us more deeply into what's really going on, right? It connects us into what am I afraid of? Because I'm stopping and I'm staying with the tenderness. I'm staying with the rawness. I'm staying with the idea or the sensation that I don't know what to do. Everything is falling apart. How do I understand? And sometimes it's not about understanding. Sometimes it's just about awareness. I'm afraid because I don't know what's coming next. I feel unprepared because maybe there are things that I haven't done to create preparedness, right, in my past. And vulnerability comes about in so many different ways and at all stages of life. But rarely do we learn to master it. And when I say master it, I don't mean overcome it. I mean be with it and allow it to reveal more of who we are to us. More of what is hidden. Allowing it to be seen. And what I love about this is that, so coming up in February, I'm doing a 3-week journey with the 10 wisdom goddesses of the Tantric tradition. And we're using this exploration archetypically so that we can get a wider and more deeper scope of not just our humanness as we are, but really also that elevated higher mind, higher frequency, higher consciousness state that is encapsulated within this divine feminine, divine mother pantheon. And so we're going to be looking at the wrathful expressions of the goddess as well as the benevolent expressions of the goddess. And what I love about the wrathful, right? We think that means like horrendous or vengeful or, scary and, all of that. It's, yes, they can appear that way, but their purpose is very different. Their purpose is this deep, unconditional love that they work with and as. But the wrathful goddesses can bring about deep levels of our vulnerability because they're breaking down structures and expressions of consciousness that we've identified with from that ego perspective that is there to keep us safe. But every structure is also designed to be dismantled at different times and places in our life. So working with this deep feminine energy of vulnerability of mastering it by mastering our capability to hold space, to hold steady, that there's nothing that we need to fix in the moment. It's simply allowing whatever needs to fall apart, and knowing on a deep level. And how do we get to the deep level of knowing that we can rely on our soul connection and God sourcing? How do we get there? We have to let go. We have to sit for a moment or two, or a day, or maybe even months, in a space that allows us to feel very raw and in the unknown. And then to recognize that there's a resiliency in that. There is a clarity that comes from that. There is deep information that we get when we allow the presence of vulnerability to hold us, where we don't fight it, where we don't try to speed it along, right? And it doesn't mean that we're immobilized, like starting in October. Like every month it seems like has had like this massive theme of dismantling. And so my experience of vulnerability has remained fairly constant. But it doesn't mean that I'm not in my life. But it means that I'm learning to be in my life in this deep presence of the unknown, and a deep presence of dying away while a new me is being revealed. And at this time, this is huge. So many people I've talked to, and you may be one of them, October seems to be kind of like this tipping point, right? And it's probably in the astrology, I'm sure it is, where we have been really moving quickly on a very fast trajectory in large themes of our lives, where we're being forced to look at things differently. We're being forced to let go, whether that's within relationships, whether that's in careers, whether that's in, do I retire, am I ready to retire or not? Whether that's in, do I move, do I stay? Do I end a career, do I move into a new career? Right? Where we let different people, places, and things go. But there's always that transitional phase and stage where we're in the limbo for a while. And that limbo is extremely vulnerable. So the invitation then of this video in particular is, how and can you settle in and not try to get away from it and not collapse into complete hopelessness, but allow yourself to feel maybe extra tired, maybe a little depressed, right? There's a big difference between the chemical depression and our cultural aversion to feeling down or sad or heavy or grief. And so depression is really about what we're resisting, feeling, and experiencing and looking at and being present with. And vulnerability, when we surrender into vulnerability, then what tends to happen is that moment of letting go allows the things that maybe we didn't want to see, maybe we didn't even know we were feeling, to bubble up to the surface. And then we sit and we're present with it. We feel it. We mourn it. We grieve it. We feel maybe the precariousness of it. And we hold ourselves deeply, deeply, tenderly. And we call on our soul presence. We call on our assistance from all the higher realms. We call on divine source. And we can call on friends as well, but part of the mastery of this phase and stage of this massive game of life that we're in is learning how to also self-source and God-source. Because our true autonomy, which then expands into interconnectivity, but that truer state of inner strength based on the power of vulnerability grows, because we can trust ourselves. We can trust our fortitude. We can trust our ability to be uncomfortable and to inner listen and inner stand who we are on deeper levels. Not from the inputs of others, but from our own deep inner wisdom. So the power of vulnerability is very real. And one of the things that I also loved about the shift from entropy into freshness within the this first gene key that we worked with is I really love and I don't remember the whole title, of moving into freshness, right? That is that new springtime. That is that birthing. That is where the juice returns, right? Entropy is the winter. Entropy is the juice is taken deep down into the roots, into our roots. And things sort of just, hang out in that cold, in that dying phase, in that holding pattern of deeper seeing. But going into freshness, they talk about the melancholy. Vulnerability, when we start to, this isn't exactly what the gene key is saying, but this is a personal experience that I've learned to work with, is that when we embrace vulnerability and that openness, and don't try to close the heart back off. Don't try to protect, but know that we can be open and raw in relationship with ourselves, first and foremost, and we can be exposed to ourselves, and we can witness us in these different textures, in these different colors, is that when we can embrace that, there's this melancholy that is really, really sweet. It's soft. It's really subtle. It's bittersweet. It's it's gentle. It might even be a little weepy. But the experience of melancholy can kind of cradle us if we aren't afraid of that gentle weepiness that is mixed with, something is happening here, right? Something is birthing. Something is different. The sprouts are starting. And yet we're still kind of in that darkness, in the unknown. So I invite you just to play with all of this. And probably what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a meditation over on Patreon with a practice of this, just so that you can have something to resource and go to support your experience of accessing and befriending, like we would the shadow, befriending and really learning to be in love with your own power of vulnerability. So I'm going to leave you with that, and I hope that this was helpful. Hop on over to Patreon if you feel called. There's a lot of offerings over there, both membership and free. So so I'd love to continue to support you over in that platform. So have a lovely day, or have a tender day, or have a raw day or evening, whatever it is, right? Whatever it is. I invite you just to be present with that. All right. Much love and many blessings.